itself and the critical role it plays in financing climate transition. Kenya, for instance, has a very ambitious goal of reducing its greenhouse gas emissions by 32% in the next 5 years. That's 2030. So how do the banks, how do financial institutions plug in and play a very critical role in achieving that particular goal? Hopefully my panel in the next hour or so digs into that, unpacks that as we go along. So allow me to introduce them as they make their way up on stage. First, we have UNEP Finance Initiative Africa and Middle East Regional Lead, Nuran Atef, joining us. Let's give her a round of applause as she makes her way up. Thank you. We also have DTB Group Senior Manager, ESG and Climate Risk, Juma Mandela, also joining the conversation. Joining the panel as well is FSD Africa Senior Specialist Capital Markets, Vimal Parmar. Thank you. Finance in Motion Senior Officer, Green Finance, John Nganga, also with us. And last but not least, Responsible Business Consulting Managing Director, Susan Njoroge, also joining the discussion. Thank you all for making time. So I guess the question that goes to all of you is to get a brief sense of who you are and what your respective organizations do with regard to financing climate transition. So I'll begin with my closest panelist, Vimal, if you can start us off. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Victoria. Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Vimal Parmar. I work for FSD Africa, and maybe you might have heard we are quite active in the climate and environmental finance space. At FSD Africa, we do many things, but I'll just mention specifically on the climate and sustainability side. So we have the capital markets pillar, where we are keen on supporting policy development in environmental and sustainable finance across the African region. We have supported many policies across Africa. We have also supported capital mobilization. So far, we have supported more than 1.3 billion US dollars in different African countries when it comes to capital mobilization. Then we also have our adaptation and resilience pillar, where we're looking at insurance and also the nature side, which is very much connected to the climate and the green or environmental agenda. We have been at the forefront, especially on the ANCA, which is the African National Capital Alliance, which we had formed. So that's what also we are doing. And we are also in early stage financing. So we provide initial capital or early stage financing to companies which are into this climate and environmental space. And we also have a much higher level of financing, which we are calling it FSD Africa Investments. We provide blended finance, both debt and equity, in different companies which are into this space, for them to scale up, grow, and also replicate in other African markets. I think in brief, that's what I can say about what the work we do in climate and environment. Thank you.
Thank you. Fantastic. Nuran?
It's working. Sure. Thank you so much for having me here today. So UNEP Finance Initiative is the UN-convened engagement with the financial system to deliver more global sustainable economies. We work with banks and insurance from all around the world, with over 500 member institutions, exceeding actually 170 trillion US dollars in total. And we work with them to connect the UN to the global finance industry. And those members are individually implementing two of the flagship frameworks that UNEP-FI has, which are the Principles for Responsible Banking and the Principles for Sustainable Insurance. And those two principles, including their respective targets and accountability frameworks, are applied on a voluntary basis. And they are applied by over half of the global financial system. And our role as UNEP-FI in all of this is to support them in their implementation journey, and we work together to develop methodologies and tools and guidance to equip them on their journey. In Africa and Middle East region specifically, we have 62 members, and in Kenya we have 2 members, Kenya Commercial Bank, and our latest joiner, Diamond Trust Bank. They just joined us a couple of months ago. So we welcome new members as well from Kenya and from all over the region as well to help advance sustainable finance agenda in the region and on a global scale.
Fantastic. Let's go to Juma.
Yes, good afternoon. My name, as well said, Juma Mandela. I handle ESG and climate risk within the DTB group. DTB has got presence across the East African. There is Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and Burundi. What is unique about DTB is that the commitment is from an institutional level where AKDN gave us commitment. That is in 2022. It was an ambitious commitment that we need to be carbon neutral in our internal operations by the year 2030. So yes, we took it, and closer home, we had to develop strategies and implementation frameworks on how to implement the same. And one of those commitments is that AKDN expect all institutions to report and of course measure on their greenhouse gas emission in terms of using a simple language, how we contribute to the climate. That is in terms of operations, both scope 1, scope 2, and even scope 3, we actually work on measuring and reporting on the same, and we've got a target on how to reduce the same. In terms of climate, clients, we are really working with our clients to reduce whatever we financed and also greening the whole internal operations. By that, we've installed solar system in one of our headquarters, that is DTB Center, also across Mombasa branch and DTB Kisumu. Out of that, we have a reduction almost 20% of the energy consumption. And even in terms of resource efficiency, we are actually checking on our waste and separating both bio-waste and whatever cannot be recycled. For our operations also, you realize much of the waste come from the electronic waste. We are working with the WE Center to recycle whatever we have from the waste that is actually coming from the bank. So in a snapshot, that is a journey that we're working for DTB.
John?
Yeah, afternoon, everyone. I work for an organization called Finance in Motion. Finance in Motion is an impact asset manager, and we manage impact funds that can be divided into 2 thematic themes. We have the social funds that social funds are funds that look at things like entrepreneurship, MSME, gender, youth, those type of inclusive topics. And on the second thematic topic, we have what we call green funds. These are funds that look at things like biodiversity conservation, climate change mitigation and adaptation, resource efficiency. And how we work is through 2 windows, so we can lend directly to financial institutions. Here in Kenya, we are working with the likes of KCB, ABSA, Family Bank, Cooperative Bank. And how we do this is we look at the bank portfolio to see how aligned it is to either the social theme or the green theme. For now, we'll only focus on the green theme. What we look at is, do they have, for instance, an exposure in the agricultural sector? And for the agricultural sector to be sustainable, there are certain proxies that we use. Proxies here to mean things like maybe certification. If you're largely looking at the export crops, you're seeing there is the likes of Rainforest Alliance Fair Trade for you to access different markets. And this certification comes with the requirements to actually produce the commodities in a certain way. The second one is the realization that we also have got domestic value chains, things like dairy, maize, cereals. They do not have internationally recognized certification schemes, but there are certain practices or production activities that are sustainable I will just give one example. In the dairy space, we see a lot of milk chilling, milk cooling, and the conversion of milk into different commodities. This is a very impactful way of operationalizing the asset, because you reduce, if you chill or if you convert this, you add value to this milk, you do, broadly speaking, three things from a climate finance perspective. One is you reduce post-harvest losses. Milk is a biological commodity. If it starts lotting, so-called post-harvest losses, in the nature, it emits greenhouse gases. This is one. The second one is that when this milk goes to waste, for instance, and here you can use any other commodity, you're basically saying that the labor, the water, the resources that went into the production of that commodity also goes to waste. So this becomes a very important sustainability element. And lastly is on the resource efficiency side, the fact that by improving or reducing post-harvest losses, you are adding value to the farmer, because then you're collecting this milk and supporting their livelihood. So this is how we look at operationalization of these themes. I think the CEO did tell us to actually speak in English, and this is why I'm using these examples so that we can actually relate to how these global funds can actually be used on a local scale to be able to meet certain climate finance requirements. Lastly, because we are cognizant of the fact that financing all these initiatives also requires us to build capacity as a bank, as an industry, as an institution. We have what we call technical assistance that is largely geared to strengthening the impact. Here we support the financial institutions to, one, understand how to operationalize these proxies that I've talked about, but also come up with policies and procedures within the organization, as earlier presented, the ESMSs, and it could also look at actually training the staff to be able to appreciate these type of topics and understand how those topics impact their operational life, because as bankers, we know most of the time we're looking at either the costs, the risks, or the pricing. How do you do this from a climate finance perspective? We do those type of trainings. So yeah, this is what we do, and happy to be engaging this afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Susan Jiroge, and I am an independent consultant, but I'm also a fellow with the University of Cambridge Center for Sustainability Leadership. So that's the hat I'll be wearing, if you were wondering. And from a CISL, so Cambridge Institute of Sustainability Leadership perspective, the first thing I'd like to say is that when we think of impact on the continent, on this continent and in Kenya and the other markets that we operate in, the first point is that we see it not so much just as climate finance, but the fact that it's a development agenda. So I just want to set that basis first. All our countries, Kenya, we have to develop, and the money needs to be heading in that direction to make it effective. So there are 4 areas that Cambridge has interventions in. The first one is, of course, around education as an academic institution. We have executive leadership programs, one example being the Business and Sustainability Executive Leadership Program, one which will be taking place next year in March here in Nairobi. It's a global flagship program. We also have Climate Finance Leadership Program in partnership with FSD Africa. So senior leadership training to catalyze the leaders who are willing and committed to use their leadership and influence for positive impact. So we really want to leverage that kind of leadership. There's also foresight, and again, an academic institution, this is part of their bread and butter. There's global specific research around sustainability, nature economy, but there's also industry specific related to the finance industry. We also convene corporate leaders groups. So there's a Center for Sustainability Finance based out of Cambridge, but we also have leaders groups that we convene here. And across each of these countries that we operate in, we have a broad engagement with financial institutions, whether it's with the insurance industry, investment, and banking as well. One of the key things that we are finding when you look at foresight or insight around climate and sustainability agenda is often the story or the research is not necessarily from our continent about our issues and our concerns, and that's something that we really want to work on driving. We call it changing the narrative and who's telling the story about our sustainability journey. And then the last area is around innovation, where we have a global incubation hub, but also as part of that incubation hub, convene a community of impact investors as well. Thank you.
Wonderful. It lays the perfect ground as we get into the discussion, and we'll also open up to questions just to engage the audience a bit more. But let me start with the man in the middle, Juma. So the question, of course, is why is financing climate transition so important? I guess the moral imperative is pretty clear. So the question I'm asking you is, what's the business case, right? And what are some of the challenges, for instance, that you've seen the banking industry encounter when going in that direction?
Yes, Victoria. To respond to that, before I even come to the business case, a bank ideally is also exposed to the physical effects of climate, like the destructive effects on its facilities, and even the transitional risks that come as a result of financed products and the clients in our portfolio. So yes, the bank is also exposed to the adverse effects of climate, and the bank has a unique role to play in terms of financing transition. Remember, we've got a role to allocate capital and also provide the same to the MSMEs and even the corporates. So we can have our unique role by working with DFIs and partners to look for funds. Out of those funds, we can give the same to the corporates to transition and even to green our financial system. Remember, the exposure to the transitional risk could come either in terms of energy-intensive sectors, like those in the mining, or even the oil and gas, and even those in the other metal structures. So this comes into the unique role for banks. Why? Apart from the exposure to the physical effects and the transitional effects, what do we do in terms of influencing that growth in terms of the transition finance? For our clients, we need to do a lot of capacity building for them to adopt the green finance products that we can develop for the same. And also in terms of internal operations, how do we handle what we contribute to climate? Be it the resources we use in terms of energy, the waste, and even our overall footprint. In terms of de-risking the elements, much of funding is currently being inhibited by either the donors will come to you, tell you this kind of project is still at developing stage. How do we de-risk it? So banks have got a unique role to de-risk these elements. And part of that is what my panelists just talked about, developing ESMS. Ideally, ESMS is an environmental social risk management system that we use to safeguard against the environmental and social risks that will come as a result of the operations we finance or any activity that we finance in the overall economy. And of course, banks also have a unique role in creating financial instruments. This could come in terms of debts or even grants. A debt instrument could be used to finance whatever technology that an SME or a corporate will come to get from the bank. We can only do this if we get first commitment from the senior management. So for banks, it starts with, first of all, how do you position yourself in terms of climate finance? Are you ready for the just transition? And that comes from, at the board level, we need to have either board committee or board member who has knowledge in terms of ESG, the risk versus the opportunities. Once it's adopted at the senior level and at the board level, then we come into in terms of how do you review that strategy? Do you have a climate strategy? Do you have a transition strategy? And how do you map it versus your overall bank strategy? For DTB, we can say we've got a three-legged stool where ESG is one of the key elements. The other one is leveraging on IT and of course, customer growth. So once you adopt it as part of the strategy, then of course, how do you implement it? How do you grow and improve with your customers? How do you develop products? There are products you can work on either on renewable energy or even energy efficiency. And how do you also bridge the gap in terms of financial inclusion? Remember, there's that technical element of financing the transition, but the gap in terms of those who are still not knowledgeable enough, those who are still left behind by the technologies that will be financing, how do you have safeguard mechanisms in some of the social elements? You can go to maybe finance an hydroelectric power plant or a wind power plant, but the inhabitants of that area or the neighboring communities, how do they address their grievances? How is the project coming to help them in the long run? So yes, we've got a unique role to provide capital, also to provide the means or the instruments to finance the same, and also we've got a unique role also to also provide safeguards for the same. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. You know, John, let's take what Juma said a bit further and look at how banks can integrate a just transition strategy, which is essentially your day job. You talked about some banks that you already do that kind of work with. So how do they do that in a practical sense?
Yeah, thank you for this. First of all, maybe the what is just transition strategy, because we at times confuse it a lot with the sustainable strategy. On the just transition strategy, we are largely looking at a roadmap that is cognizant of the fact that as we do this transition, there will be some affected population. And this affected population could be affected directly. Classical example is that currently internal combustion engine technology is becoming very unpopular, and we are looking more towards electrification. So if you look at the technology, internal combustion, there is a whole value chain organized around it with, let's say, people in, let's say, spare parts, people who are mechanics, this is the skill side. If we were to fully transition, what would happen to the livelihoods and the employment of these people? This is what we look at from a just transition perspective. Are you thinking about when we say we want to do renewable energy, and at some point we get to a good stage that maybe certain power lines becomes obsolete? What would it mean to the livelihood of those people who are employed by the power production companies? So this is, first of all, the shift in understanding that we need to impact to the financial institution, starting from the highest level possible. That is the board, all the way to the operational staff. But to do it, I think the question is on the how. We largely follow the same way we look at a strategy formulation. You have to first of all look at what are your commitments, in which sectors. So you get a clarity on these are the sectors. Could be manufacturing, could be transport, could be maybe agriculture, could be building and construction. Okay, because those are the sectors, then who is being affected by the transition events? So you need to spell out what are these transition events. Is it sustainable agriculture? Are we talking about, for instance, our OMCs, oil marketing companies, being impacted? So with that clarity on the transition events, you move now to the next level of who is this? Who is this stakeholder who is affected? Are you able to reach out to them and get their perspective? And this is now where it starts to get a bit tricky and challenging, because if you want to get different perspectives of all affected people internally, that is directly and indirectly, you need resources. And we know resources are very scarce. So as a bank, that's where now, as my brother panelist did indicate, partnerships starts to become very important, because probably instead of reaching out to the individual employees, if they have a union, if they have an association, if they have something like this, then it becomes easy to get that feedback from them. Now, after this, you get into the fourth area, where you are now looking at the feedback you are getting. These are the different perspectives, and classifying them to either clear opportunities, as we've said, if people are transitioning, and some of the sector members are saying that they will tap into that green transition. If you're in the transport side, you start to see opportunities of people who want to maybe set up a recharging station, maybe install capacities to fabricate some of the batteries, or actually come up with the batteries themselves. That becomes a clear opportunity. The next one becomes risks. And risks here, we need to classify them broadly in two categories. So there will be the risks that is directly exposed because you have financed to that sector, and there is transition happening. A classical example here maybe would be, we are starting to see a huge transition from tea pickers to solar-powered tea plucking machine. If I have lent a facility to tea pickers, these are the workers, I have a clear risk, and I need now to start interrogating, what should I do? If that's a clear risk, then the other one becomes the impact. Some of these employees, some of the populations will be affected, others are vulnerable. You need to see what is it that you can do. And this now brings you to the next level of what type of commitments and key performance indicators do you want to put in place. On the opportunity side would be probably certain product formulation. On the risk side, the classical risk-adjusted programs that we have. It's either you accept, you say, okay, maybe it will last for another 3-4 years, so I'm fine, this will have been repaid. You avoid, you basically say that probably as from year X, we'll not be financing this sector because it will be swiped out by transition. Or for this locality, we will not do this. On the impact side, to a large extent, this becomes also an area that requires a lot of partnership, because you're looking at vulnerable affected communities, low-income households who do not have I think we were told to not use English, but these I have, the adaptive capacity. Like, they will not be able to respond positively. They will actually be swept out by, in quotes, this transition. And this is where now you need to start mobilizing, because you have that capacity, to look at who are the partners, who are the potential partners who can support this type of communities. And then lastly, is a component around reporting, because once you have done this commitment, you need to also report, and you need to make publications or communications around this whole process as we've maybe visualized it. And the opportunities that come with this whole process is that, one, there are climate funds, there are just transition researchers, this type of people who are out there. They have funds, they have grants, and if you're able to align and communicate this, then either they can reach out to you, or your investor relations team can be using some of these data points when they are communicating to this type of people. So you also get to, let's call it, de-risk your portfolio, because then you're very clear on what you can be able to accept within your risk appetite framework. And also you can be able to be very clear on the why we are avoiding certain elements. And then when you have maybe some of the banks have the foundation side, they can now start to target the foundation arms to be able to even work with the affected low-income households. So this is how we would first of all look at it, and this is what we work with our banking partners to do.
Well, there's a wide array of options, John, and thank you for pointing those out. Nuran, let me come to you and let's talk about financed emissions. It's a big problem for banks, not just in Kenya, but across the world. And John talked about some of the big emitting sectors that are big clients for banks, right? How do you start to advise banks to tackle this particular challenge?
Thank you so much. So it is indeed an issue. However, I believe that it should be taken in a step-by-step approach in a sense. So one of the things that I really liked also what Juma said, alluding to the steps that the Diamond Trust Bank took in order to incorporate these aspects, and it's quite similar in that sense. So I think looking at banks' emissions, Scope 3, which looks at the loans and the investments that the bank are having, it is around 700 times greater than the emissions from Scope 1 and 2. So from our perspective, we would highly encourage that banks focus on Scope 3 emissions, given the scale and the impact that that could have. And also in doing that, it's very important to build the capacities or the capabilities, and not just within the banks. This is something that will require conversation with clients and customers, with stakeholders and others, and including even like the government and industry associations as KBA. So for instance, building carbon accounting capabilities, measuring the carbon footprint of the financed emissions across the bank's business lines, especially the carbon intensive ones, as you mentioned. The bank can do this through, in line with the evolving carbon accounting methodologies and policies that are now happening, as well as the national requirements and priorities of Kenya, like the National Determined Contributions, the NDCs. So this is an area to look within the bank so that you have a better understanding on what's happening within your bank so that you can make better informed decisions on target settings. So for instance, another aspect is in doing that is the Partnership for Carbon Accounting Financials, PCAF, is an institution that provides a standard that can be used to measure your bank's baseline carbon footprint of the corporate loan book of the bank. So focusing first on some carbon intensive sectors and then further expanding to the entire portfolio of the bank will be a good way to understand where you are and where you need to be. And you can understand also your bank's contribution through the finance emissions to the national emission strategy overall. The other aspect is on target setting and clients and customers, as mentioned. So target setting, the bank can start by developing interim targets. So we understand that it's going to be a step-by-step approach. So start having interim targets to reduce finance emission across business lines in various sectors. There exists some climate-specific sectoral pathways that the bank can use, such as they are available for oil and gas, for corporate real estate, for aviation, and power generation as well. Apologies for that. And these are provided by IEA, SBTI, and others. However, with all that, there is still a lack of regional and country-specific sectoral pathways. Thank you so much. There is still a lack of regional and country-specific sectoral pathways, and this is something we're facing in the African region as well. So in doing that, conversations with the clients and customers, because at the end of the day, reducing GHG emissions, it's not just about the bank, it's also seeing the bank's influential role in addressing it with the real economy as well. So this might seem like a lot of things to do. However, at UNEP-FI, we just launched something called the Climate Mitigation Journey. So the Climate Mitigation Journey is actually a strategy framework or an approach that looks at the end-to-end approach your bank can take or can follow to align with the Paris Climate Agreement to actually implement decarbonization, reduce GHG emissions up until the bank can reach net zero and beyond even them, for instance, joining the Net Zero Banking Alliance, which also UNEP-FI hosts the secretariat for. So the Climate Mitigation Journey, or CMJ, as we call it, is actually being implemented in partnership with GFANZ, the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. And it contains 15 climate capabilities that any bank, regardless of its level of maturity when it comes to sustainability and its jurisdiction as well, that they can apply and develop and iterate. So it looks at mapping out all climate-related activities, access to relevant guidelines, methodologies, and materials. Like I mentioned, there are some gaps in terms of sectoral pathways for the region. For region-specific aspect, this is something that we are hoping that through the CMJ we can support. Very sorry, I don't know what's wrong. That we are hoping that we can support the banks joining, that when those approaches are in place, they can plug and play in this so that they are already ready for something like that. We actually have a 2-day workshop next week in partnership with KVA as well, GFANZ and FSD Africa, among others, on the climate mitigation journey as well. And the first day is a high-level breakfast meeting, and then the next day is a technical workshop that tackles so many things, including the climate mitigation journey. So we highly encourage you to join us. And actually, the registration for the event closes today. So we hope that you can be there. So KBA, of course, they also have the link. So please don't hesitate to reach out. And we look forward to seeing all the banks there. So I think that kind of concludes what I wanted to say, including all the coughing. So thank you for your patience on that.
We'll blame it on the climate conditions in the room. Vimal, let me come to you. Innovative financial instruments are critical in making a lot of this happen. We've heard blue bonds, green bonds, debt for nature swaps. I mean, there's so much out there. What would you say banks can start looking into in terms of innovative financial instruments?
Thank you very much, Victoria. So in terms of innovative financial instruments, I think banks have the capability to use any of those as tools to attract capital. I would just like to give a background. Africa as a whole attracts less than 3% of total finance, which is available for such kind of instruments. It's not that the capital is not there. It's just that Africa is not ready with its projects to attract such kind of capital. And I think the financial services industry, including banks, play a very critical role. One of the instruments which we haven't seen much in the African continent, and it can be used to attract significant capital, is green equity. So green equity is where at least 50% of a bank's revenues or investments are actually classified as green. It does not mean that the bank becomes green, but its operation. So in terms of reduced wastage, more efficiency in terms of energy, and the like, reduced waste that the bank is producing, whether it's paper or anything else, can attract such kind of capital. What Victoria mentioned is also in terms of instruments. So we have the green, the social, and the sustainability bonds, and we also have sustainability-linked bonds. Now, I think a key difference between Africa and the global markets is that in Africa, if you look at the ESG, we lack the G part. Yeah, we'll all agree to that. But the global market has the S and G, but they don't have the E, because Africa is blessed with a lot of natural assets. So as a bank, you have a lot of lending opportunities to such kind of businesses or SMEs or even SGBs, which is small and growing businesses, which are looking at scaling up or even starting businesses for climate mitigation. And banks can raise capital both locally and internationally. I would like to give examples. So for example, in Tanzania, we have two banks, CRDB Bank and NMB Bank. I'm sure some of you have heard about it. So CRDB and NMB did an MTN program, which is a medium-term note, totaling of $700 million, which is the capital they are going to get through either a sustainability bond for CRDB Bank and a green bond for NMB Bank. It's basically having the pipeline of projects or initiatives for which they will be using the capital for onward lending into that sectors. At the same time, we have gender bonds. I think in Africa, there is a very big nexus between climate and women. I don't know whether many people know or understand this, but in Africa, the women are a key driver of some of the businesses, including the SME businesses, and also the future for the next generation. So in Tanzania, NMB Bank issued a gender bond, which raised more than $31 million, and that money is only going to onward lend for capital to women businesses in that country. So as banks, you can play a very critical role because you can onward lend to any sector, as long as the sector has a climate and sustainability angle. And then we also have sustainability linked bonds. Now this is different from the green bonds and the sustainable bonds in the sense that the sustainability linked bonds are ESG linked. So they are specific ESG KPIs or indicators, which the bank initially puts them as a baseline and also as targets. Now, how this works is when you onward lend to an institution which has such kind of KPIs, if they achieve the KPIs or surpass the KPIs, they get a reduction in the amount of interest they pay. However, if they don't, then there is a opposite effect. So this is quite intentional, and it's also incentivizing. You can see that firms which are looking at environmental benefits, they will do whatever they can to make sure that they have to reduce their costs in terms of paying the interest. So banks can also raise capital through sustainability linked bonds for onward lending to any sector, or even specifically if you're looking at the gender angle, to the women businesses as well. And then lastly, I would like to talk about blue bonds as well. Kenya especially is blessed with the coastline. And we all know how some of our coastlines are, they've really deteriorated. There's a lot of pollution there, but this can be improved. So it has a link with nature, which I think the next panel is going to talk about, where there are instruments like payment for ecological services, where the people who are looking to maintain the environment or clean up the environment are actually paid for that. And this not only creates jobs in any economy, but it also restores the ecosystem that we are living in. So there is a very big connection that banks can have across the economy, across the different sectors that we are looking at. And lastly, but not least, is on the policy side. As I mentioned, Africa lacks the G aspect, which is the governance. We have the E and the S. But when it comes to the G aspect, reporting is very critical. I know some banks are already doing it. Some banks have the sustainability strategy. But just having a sustainability strategy on paper does not yield anything. It has to have impacts, and these impacts have to be transformative. So when it comes to capital mobilization and attracting capital, we see banks doing rights issues. We see them looking for other debt instruments. But this is one of the most attractive debt instruments right now. And there are trillions of dollars globally which are available. G-Funds, for example, has more than 500 members, and they have in excess of $1.3 trillion available to lend into such kind of businesses. So I think from a Kenyan perspective, we can do this, but we have to be intentional about it. Banks have to have pipeline of projects where they can onward lend to businesses, whether they are small or growing, which are actually impactful not only to the market they are serving, but also to the economy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Susan, let me finish up with you. So what are the risks? What happens if, the financial institutions do not take up the challenge of directing their financing to low carbon economies, doing what Vimal talked about, Nuran talked about, Juma and John, and yourself? What are the implications of not taking up this challenge?
Yeah, I'm glad I'm kind of closing out on this one, because I think Juma raised some really good ones when you talked about the physical risks. the inevitable floods, the famines, the droughts, etc. We all know, for example, in Kenya that our rivers our lakes in the Rift Valley are rising. And also there's the possibility with physical risks around that also happening with our ocean levels at the coast. So that's just some examples of the physical risks. John, you also talked about the transition risks. So, obsolete technology or stranded assets. I think it's important to start considering that. We can often look at the things separate from the countries or the places that we're living. You can wear the hat of being the banker, but you forget to wear the hat of being the Kenyan, right? And the issue is one and the same to you. And that's why I said earlier about development. And I'd even reframe it to say it's not so much about financing a low-carbon economy, but financing low-carbon development as a country that we need, because that development has to deliver not just economic growth that is quality, but also social progress for citizens. So the other risk, just on the social progress part that I touch on, is a social risk. Humanitarian crisis, social unrest, civil discord, all of these things that are brought about by some of this physical and transition risk that both Juma and John highlighted. And then there's the missed opportunity in itself. So not only do you miss the potential of investing or growing new industries, whether it's circular economy or sustainable agriculture or new infrastructure for the new kind of mobility and transport that we need in a developing country. I think those are all missed opportunities. And if you're not on the bus, hopefully the e-bus, quickly enough, you lose your competitive edge and you lose your clients. I think today's, the morning session sustainable finance event also sends signals to the markets of who are the banks who are driving this agenda forward and which are the banks that are not. There's the obvious ones of regulatory and legal pressures. You know those best, you feel them the most, but soon will come legal liability as well, which I think as a vibrant, litigious society, I think is something that we can expect, especially when we see the tensions that are happening between civil society or community groups and the private sector. So maybe I'll leave it there. I think the credit risk and what you hold on your books was also highlighted. Yeah, thanks.
Fantastic. Let's transition into some questions, comments from the audience. I believe we have a roving mic. Yes. Any questions, comments? Okay, that appears to be a good sign. We've covered everything. Let's give one more round of applause to my distinguished panel. Thank you so much for your insights. You may take your seats. Thank you so much. We're going to move into our final panel, which will be moderated by Dr. Samuel Tiriongo, Director of Research and Policy at KBA. He will come up and introduce his panelists.
Thank you, Victoria, for a very insightful session, and the panelists that have given us very, very interesting ideas on how to go forward. So it's a great opportunity again to be part of these discussions this afternoon, and we are ahead of time thanks to Victoria and the panel that has just ended. So the panel that is before us today is going to discuss about opportunities in advancing a nature positive economy and the TNFD framework. We were warned in the morning not to use jargon, so a task force on nature related financial disclosures framework. So before I introduce them, allow me just to mention something brief about the focus area that we have talked about, which is advancing a nature-positive economy, and of course the TNFD framework, is that we recognize that world over economies are largely and highly dependent on nature. And of course, from that global standpoint, we again recognize that ecosystem services are huge in terms of size and actually worth about $125 trillion annually. So this is not a mean feat. This is a sector of focus that we need to give a lot of attention to. And of course, they support economic activities in very key sectors, some of them very strong in supporting our economies. And of course, when you mention agriculture, fishing, forestry, and tourism, and employing over 1.2 billion people across the world, that's not something that we need to ignore. So for us, our focus is really how best can we promote and advance nature-positive financing from a standpoint of sustainability, because that's where the world is moving. Because by doing this, we develop our resilience to shocks, and particularly those that affect food security, protecting us from the effects of climate change, mitigating climate change itself, and improving our health. And of course, as we do all these things, we look at opportunities for investments. With that said, we have a very, very interesting panel, very experienced professionals and experts in the region who would delve into this and discuss the opportunities in advancing nature-positive economy and, of course, within the TNFD framework. So allow me now to invite our panelists on stage. One is the IUCN Climate Change and Biodiversity Senior Officer, Catherine Mungai. If you're in the room, please make your way to the front. WWF Kenya Head of Conservation, Jackson Kiplagat. I thought we had started clapping. Equity Bank Kenya Head of Sustainability, Samson Kanai. Samson, thank you. Then Anchor Head of Secretariat, Dorothy Maseke. GIZ Program Manager, Sustainable Agricultural Systems and Policies, Dr. Sophia Bomat. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. And I don't know whether we have Arnold Ambudo from UNDP. Are you here? Yes, great. Allow me to introduce you. UNDP Portfolio Analyst, Environment and Resilience, Arnold Ambundo. You're welcome stage. We could do in the spirit of sustainability. Yes. Okay. Arnold promised me that he's a gentleman, so he'll sit on the harder seat. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have a very rich panel today to discuss this matter of nature-positive economy. So maybe as we start with you, Arnold, you could, and as we do a round of introductions, maybe in brief, so that we have another round of questions that would follow. Tell us about your organization that you represent and the work it does around the subject of promoting nature-positive financing, both in the country, in the region, and globally. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Arnold. I work for UNDP. UNDP is the United Nations Development Program. Of course, we've been here for a while in the country, pretty much. We are in over 170 countries. In Kenya, we work across many sectors in governance, whether you talk support to IBC, whether you talk support to national police reform, whether you talk to issues around many things. But on environment, we work also very closely with governments a lot, mainly the Ministry of Environment, Energy, and a number of ministries. And we have a portfolio of over 63 projects just in Kenya alone. That's how huge our portfolio is. Just for information, UNDP holds globally the highest amounts of money for climate change, whether we talk about mitigation, adaptation, loss and damage, or anything related to climate finance. It's a custodian of most of these funds that we see around that we support our governments. At the moment, related to this particular summit, we have a new program that's coming on board for Kenya. Kenya was onboarded last year called Biodiversity Finance, which I guess I'll speak to it more, and why we are looking for partnership with the private sector, the bankers. We are also implementing umbrella support program where we hope to support the government. Governments are usually our main implementing partners. But of course, we do work with private sector as and when needed. We look forward to developing a biodiversity finance for Kenya. We are also into disaster risk management, response side of it. So UNDP pretty much, based on our mandate, which is development, which is very broad, we are pretty much in across many sectors, not any specific sector that we are in. So looking forward to that discussion. But briefly, that's what UNDP does and why we are here interested in this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you. We can.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Catherine Mungai, and I work with IUCN. I've heard in the morning my advice not to use jargon. Apologies, I was not here, so maybe I'm excused. But anyway, IUCN stands for the International Union for Conservation of Nature, and IUCN has been in existence for over seven decades, having been created in 1948. And the mission of IUCN is to influence societies to conserve nature, nature's diversity and integrity, and also to ensure that natural resources are used sustainably and equitably. So mainly IUCN is a membership organization, and we draw partnerships of members from government and also non-governmental organizations, as well as indigenous people and local communities, and even sub-counties or sub-governments. So right now, IUCN, which is a global organization, is made up of 1,400 member organizations. And then we also work through commissions. So these are scientific commissions which provide the science, the data, and the knowledge that we use to inform the work that we do. So we have over 16,000 experts who are members of different commissions. For example, we have the Commission on Education and Communication. We have one that focuses purely on ecosystem management, environmental and economic social policy. We have the Species Survival Commission, which is in charge of what we call the red list. I think if you have some scientists or maybe many of you who interact with the natural resource aspects, you may have heard about the IUCN red list. And then we also have a commission that is focusing on the climate crisis, as well as one that focuses on environmental law and protected areas. So these commissions are actually open. If anyone is interested, you can reach out to me and I can share with you the link. You can be able to join and see how you can influence the space, especially as we seek to discuss more about sustainable finance and how we can use nature and nature's capital to enhance our livelihoods. So in the context of today's meeting, one of the few areas we'll be focusing on are, IUCN has led the way in developing a nature positive pathway through the IUCN Global Standard for Nature-Based Solutions. And I'll be talking a bit more about that and how we can interact more with the NBS standards to inform our work. We also work with financial institutions. So here in Kenya, we've actually partnered with KBA and other like-minded institutions in the past to undertake risk analysis, to undertake policy reviews, to see how environmental regulations and financial institutions can interact. So some of the regulations that NEMA create, how do these have an impact on the work that the banks do? Then we also In the previous panel, they talked about the green bonds, the blue bonds, the gender bonds, and the different bonds. So IUCN is also part of the partnership structures that is developing these blue bonds. And then we also focus a lot on capacity building and knowledge sharing. We have the IUCN Academy, where we have several modules. We have one on sustainable finance, which could be of interest to the team here. We also have one looking at nature-based solutions, which is a certification course. There's a bit of a cost implication to that, but it's an interesting course. And then we've also partnered with KBA to develop a module which is available on the SFI platform. And then finally, we are also part of the, I don't know if it was mentioned in the morning about the Global Biodiversity Framework. I missed that, but hopefully it was mentioned, because this is what is informing biodiversity conservation for the next, up to 2030 through to 2050. So in terms of the GBF, we're also working with institutions to see how we can specifically implement Target 15, which outlines how businesses can contribute to the Global Biodiversity Framework mission by progressively reducing their negative impact on biodiversity, by assessing and disclosing their impact on biodiversity, and also by considering their impact on biodiversity along the supply chains. So I think we're going to be discussing more during this panel. Thank you.
Thank you. Jackson?
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Jackson Kiplagat, and I head conservation programs at WWF Kenya. WWF is the Worldwide Fund for Nature, and WWF Kenya is a part of a network of about 100 offices around the world in 100 countries. And I know most of us may not know that WWF bought 51 hectares of what is now Lake Nakuru National Park in 1960s and donated to the government of Kenya to be the national park that we have in Nakuru today. So 3/4 of it was actually acquired by WWF and donated to the government of Kenya to safeguard the rhino population that was being lost at that time, but to also safeguard an important biodiversity hotspot, which is now a Ramsar site or a wetland of international importance. That is where WWF started its work in Kenya and in Africa. But today, WWF is in wildlife conservation. It is in supporting functioning habitats, forests, rangelands, marine environment, freshwater ecosystems, as well as working with many stakeholders around reducing the impact of our footprint on nature. And that is where our sustainable finance work is nested. It is also where our plastics engagement is nested. It is also where our climate change work is nested. We also work with government, we also work with private sector and stakeholders to enhance enabling conditions for promoting sustainable development. Today we are here discussing finance because we at WWF believe that finance is a critical pillar in influencing either positively or negatively the degradation of our environment. And we consider finance, markets, and governance as important drivers of safeguarding our natural resources. That is why WWF globally, and even here in Kenya, has continued to invest on interventions around sustainable finance. The work around the Green Economy Strategy for Kenya 2016-2030 is actually the genesis of a number of discussions in this room around sustainable finance, because one of the models of advancing sustainability was innovative financing. And that is where we've drawn a lot of inspiration around the Green Bonds program, around a number of interventions around climate change. When you look at that strategy and look at the National Climate Change Action Plan, the first one, which actually laid the basis for the subsequent action plans, and the fact that we now have a sector on green economy and climate change within the discussions of the medium-term planning is an important strategy that is shaping how these engagements around finance will be going moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Samson?
Thank you, Jackson. And good afternoon, everyone. My name is Samson Kanai. I'm the head of sustainability at Equity Bank, Kenya. Equity Bank or Equity Group is started about 40 years ago here in Kenya, and as a building society, and has since grown into spreading over a number of countries in East Africa, going to Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, Southern Sudan, and most recently in DRC. So for the Kenyan subsidiary, we are the biggest subsidiary in the group, holding about half of the group's balance sheet. And so for this discussion, I'll focus just on the Kenyan subsidiary and the work that we are doing here, but a bit of touching on some of the work that spills over from the group-wide initiatives. In terms of our strategic focus, the Kenyan subsidiary borrows its strategic focus from the group strategy, Africa Recovery and Resilience Plan. And in general terms, what that looks at is capacitating and enhancing productivity of industries and sectors, looking at it from whether it's raw materials production, moving over to manufacturing or value addition, and then connecting the finished products to key markets and global supply chains. In terms of our approach to nature, one of the significant things that Equity has done is signing up to be an early adopter of TNFD framework. That was in last year when the call was made, and when the TNFD framework was formally launched. And what that means is that we committed to start not just making disclosures from this year, 2024, but also looking at how our business impacts, how our business operations interface with nature, and some of the actions we can be able to take to looking at it from risk management and also looking at it from opportunities. Something about the sectors that we finance. Here in Kenya, we are heavy on agriculture, and one of the key focus areas for growth for the Kenyan subsidiary is financing for agriculture financing. So, and I think we all know and appreciate the impact food and agriculture has on nature. I think in terms of human-induced activities, agriculture, forest, and land use is the biggest driver, and I think closely followed by infrastructure, built environment. So for us, nature is a very critical area from a point of risk management to our key portfolio, but also from a point of looking at opportunities. So since signing up to be an early adopter of TNFD, we have taken a number of actions. First of all, we have partnered with FSD Africa under ANCA, Africa Natural Capital Alliance, to do a pilot, what we are calling a nature pilot. And from that, we have taken a number of steps. First of all is to train our highest sort of accountability level in governance, that is our board, on nature, looking at it from risk, basically the implications from a point of risk and opportunities, just to make sure that at that level, the nature agenda is appreciated and the key actions that we need to take as a business in terms of seizing the opportunities and managing the exposure have support from the highest level. Then from that, we have looked at the sectors that we finance. Here in Kenya, we have been looking at food and agriculture. At the group level, we have looked at extractives with a keen focus on the DRC operation, and looking at, first of all, what are the key intersection points with nature. And the thing about nature is the impacts being location specific. So we have been very keen on understanding where are we landing, where is that activity happening, what are the key intersections, whether it's sort of interfacing with key biodiversity areas, and what kind of impact that could be driving. So from that, we have taken a systematic approach to make sure that in the same way that we do climate risk assessment for our lending operations. We have integrated nature risk assessment and consideration for our lending operations for those two key sensitive sectors. Yeah, so basically that's what we have done, and basically on top of that, we are quite active in the Kenyan conservation space through Equity Group Foundation, where we are supporting the government in the initiative to plant 15 billion trees by 2030, and we are on our course to hit our own set target of planting 35 million trees. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Dorothy?
My name is Dorothy Maseke. I lead the secretariat, I'm the head of secretariat of the African Natural Capital Alliance, which is essentially an advocacy arm of FSD Africa's nature program. So within FSD, Vimal had mentioned earlier, there are many pillars, and one of those is risk and resilience, within which the nature program that I also lead sits. And, you know, within the nature program, then we have focus on a number of aspects, which I hope I'll have an opportunity to speak about later. But I think I want to focus more on the why. And why we are doing this is because nature is so critical for Africa's economy. 65% of Africa's, the world's arable land is actually in Africa. If you look at the opportunity side of it, 30% of minerals are based out of Africa. 25% of species are in Africa. Yet there's a major financing gap, around $700 billion required to finance that which essentially drives Africa's economy. And all of us are Kenyans, so you all understand the role of agriculture, the role of tourism. You grew up in farms, you know how this drives our economies. So within Africa, within Anchor, what we are doing is actually to bridge the gap between the scientists on my left and the bankers, you know, in the room, and development partners. So what we do is then we are saying that science is perfect. Science speaks. Science is saying that, you know, we have, more than 70% of the bird species, not there. There are parts of the world, and I see someone who was very passionate about lions, Nkatha. She worked with me some years back, and she had an excellent idea about lions. I keep, 5 years later, we are seeing some of the banks that you're working with, raising lion bonds. So what we are saying is that some of our children, our grandchildren, may never get to see lions. So what do we do at Anchor? We try to crowd in capital. I know that's a development speak. Let me use English. We try to convince bankers like you, investors, to come together and work with scientists and work with development partners, including ourselves, to actually bring capital or bring financing that will actually enhance and conserve nature towards what we call a nature positive economy, which, again, technical lingo, but simply means that by 2050, we actually need to have more nature than we have now. That's essentially what, any word you see anyone saying nature positive, that's what it means. And that's what we do at Anchor. I hope I'll have time to talk about what we can do.
Yes, we'll come back. Sophia?
Yes, thank you for having me. First of all, I would like to commend the organizers on this professional event and the great timekeeping. I think it's because the bankers know the value of their time. So the last time I sat on a panel, I was given half a minute for my presentation, so I feel much comfortable today. So my name is Sophia Baumert. I'm working for GIZ. GIZ stands for Deutsche Gesellschaft für internationale Zusammenarbeit, and for some reason there is no official translation. So I would say it's like something like German Development Corporation. So it is, GIZ is the implementing agency of the German government delivering services in the field of sustainable development and development cooperation. So the portfolio is quite big. We have 25,000 staff globally, and we have over 1,700 projects. But for today, I really would like to zoom into one project here in Kenya, and this is what I'm managing, and the project is called Sustainable Agriculture Systems and Policies. And the project seeks to contribute to the transformation of agri-food systems in Kenya. by working on policy, finance, and innovations as levers. We closely cooperate with the Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock Development, and we try to align as much as possible with their agendas. And as project, we are focusing on public finance and how it is spent. I think this could be a new perspective today, because I think we are mostly talking about private finance coming from private finance institutions. But I think it's worthwhile also to look at public finance. One of the famous UNEP reports states that the majority of public support to agriculture producers is either price distorting or harmful to nature. And it concludes that repurposing public support is a multi-billion-dollar opportunity. And this is because environmentally harmful subsidies and tax incentives currently far outweigh all finance flows, public and private, that go towards nature-based solutions. So I think we really have to talk about also the negative finance flows and how we can repurpose them. This is at the global level, but of course also in Kenya, we need to look at the scarce public resources and how they are spent. And actually we need clear evidence that the benefits of the spending outweighs the costs. And with costs, I also mean the external costs, like harming the environment. And one of the famous negative examples is the fertilizer subsidy, where costs and benefits are not always so clear. So what we are looking in is into subsidy reforms, alternative incentive mechanisms that can boost agriculture productivity and incentivize sustainable agriculture practices, but also blended finance possibilities to reduce risks for private investors in nature-based solutions. And for now, this is what we contribute to the finance flow towards nature positive. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sophia. Perhaps we'll start again with you so that we just continue the discussion in terms of, I know you've zeroed in on agriculture. We all agree how agriculture is important and the mainstay of our economy. Perhaps you could give us just a little more glimpse into what are the risks from your standpoint in the agriculture sector, and what are some of the incentives, I know you've started mentioning some of them, that could actually spur investments in nature-positive agriculture?
Yeah, of course. So yeah, I think it has been mentioned several times that the nature underpins so many economies, and particularly agriculture sector. And if we don't cater for nature, we will see continued decline of agriculture productivity with all its consequences. So I think this is pretty clear, and this can also be seen in Kenya. And smallholder farmers are the largest investors in agriculture, and they are the producers of our food. And if they are doing it right, they could be also the largest investor in nature. They are catering for the climate, for the biodiversity, for our lands. Yet their multifunctional services or their contribution to ecosystem services is not 100. So they don't receive any compensation for that. And this is because simply nature positiveness is not factored in most of our economic decisions or models. So I think what it needs is really a paradigm shift away from an economic thinking or economic model that is only thinking agriculture in a one-dimensional way, that is only producing food. But agriculture is really contributing to so many ecosystem services. And this needs to be taken into account. And I think the farmers need incentives that really incentivize their investment into nature, into long-term solutions that are not giving the immediate return on investments. But why should farmers do? They want to increase productivity because this is what the market honors. So we need finance products that allow the transition to more sustainable systems. So for a farmer, transitioning to a more sustainable systems in most ways means a decline in productivity in the first run, because maybe they have to plant trees, they have to invest into their soil health, and so this could mean that the productivity is decreasing. So there is no incentive at all to transition. So I think we need finance mechanisms and products that really that are bridging this transition period and giving incentives. And these can be different mechanisms. There are the market-based mechanisms such as carbon finance, but they also have their drawbacks for smallholder farmers. They are highly complicated and result-based. So maybe we can also look in performance-based payments where farmers receive a direct compensation for doing good. It could be payments for ecosystem services. It could be alternative subsidy mechanisms for sustainable practices. There, the public sector comes in again, that they are not using only subsidies for fertilizers, but they could also subsidize organic fertilizer, or they could subsidize good agricultural practices whatsoever. So they could create many incentives. And I think we need blended finance solutions that are also covering this transition period. And one example that I like to use is one innovative incentive mechanism that could be established is that farmers receive a bonus payment for soil health services. So whenever they are doing something that is increasing the soil health, they immediately receive bonus payments. And in the long run, this will then increase also the soil health and the productivity. And these kind of schemes could also be linked to carbon finance at a later stage because, of course, planting trees, catering for the soil is also increasing the carbon, and then also the market mechanism, carbon finance could be leveraged. There are lessons learned from other countries, and I think there are many solutions out there that can be looked at, and I think both public and private is playing a role in really getting the finance down to the farmers and setting the right incentives. Thank you.
Thank you. And before we come to you, Dorothy, maybe we could have Jackson really give us some of the major drivers to the biodiversity loss. I know WWF, you've mentioned, has had a very critical intervention running over 50 years ago in Kenya. You could shed some light on the critical biodiversity loss drivers and perhaps what banks can do in that space to reverse that or to mitigate the loss.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think maybe before I just share a few ideas about the drivers, just to share with you a little bit of some facts about what we have actually lost, for example, in the last 50 years. WWF publishes a report called the Living Planet Report, and it is published on an annual basis. And the basis for this report is tracking of some species over time globally. In Africa, for example, taking an example of wildlife species, we've lost about 76% of wildlife in the last 50 years. If you look at the lion species that my sister here is, I think they made reference to, in the last 50 years, we've actually lost significantly the lion population, and we have about 2,500 individuals remaining. And you know, the lions, the hyenas are usually the what used to be called, you know, the cleaners of the environment in a way. Without them, then you would have challenges of diseases that come from other deaths of other animals and so forth in the environment, among many others. If you look at the forestry sector, for example, we have lost about, we lose about 12,000 hectares annually of forest cover. I know we are putting in efforts to plant, but the balance between our use and what we put in is still having a challenge. And I think we need to grow it to the extent that at the end of the day, we have a positive result at the end of the year. If you look at water and the link between our forests and our water sources. We were having a discussion over lunch with a few colleagues, and they were giving indications of how in their villages they used to have water flowing, but now they don't. Those of us in Nairobi, if you did your bore about 10 years ago, and somebody came last year, you now have no water because their bore is deeper than yours. and the level of water has sunk. What I'm trying to say here is that there are quite a number of challenges we are facing as humanity that are actually driving the losses of biodiversity and natural resources, which are our mainstay. These include, for example, deforestation, which I've mentioned, issues of degraded habitats, homes of other species. We have made it so difficult for some of these species to survive. In certain instances, our agricultural practices are incompatible with nature. We clear natural areas that have multiple species, rich species. We replace them with a monoculture or one crop, for example. And we go ahead and use the chemicals that clear everything so that it makes it easy for us to be able to, do other things. We have invasive species. If you walk around today, many of the hotels in Nairobi here with some water, what do they call them? Let's say they have water pans within the facilities. You will not fail to see something called the water hyacinth, floating very nicely with its very nice flowers. Those of us who drive around Kenyatta National Hospital, Nairobi Hospital, there is always a gentleman there selling water hyacinth as a very nice new flower in the market. This is how we have degraded our water bodies. Now, from Kisumu, we are in every water body around the country. If you look at Thika here, the rivers that flow into the Tana, they are already infested with water hyacinth. If you look at Nairobi Dam here, it is covered completely with water hyacinth, invasive species. If you go to the rangelands, you will see a number of other species taking over some of these rangeland areas. Pollution. We talked about Nairobi River. What is the problem of Nairobi River? It's pollution. Pollution from where? From our houses, from our factories. We channel our sewage into that river. If you go up into the source, you realize the water from the source is a little bit still not very bad. But as you move, you realize that it gets a little bit murky. The reason why is because we are working so hard as humanity to throw away waste just away from your doorstep, but meet it somewhere else, either in the dining or somewhere in your neighbor's house in form of food. So what I'm trying to say is that these challenges, these drivers of biodiversity loss are making it difficult for us to be able to live sustainably as humanity. The finance sector has a very important role. Imagine if a banking sector player says that for me to give you money to construct your residential house or a business premise near a river, I must confirm that that river is safe from your actions. I must confirm that you have, even if you skip the procedures because of one reason or the other, I must be convinced as a bank that my money is not going to be endangered by your actions, because if the government wakes up one day and says you did it wrongly, then that facility is going to be brought down. If it is brought down, I don't know whether the bank will find the owner anywhere. That bank will move to another country that does not exist, and it will be very difficult to recover your loan. So that is a big risk. And it is important also for the banking sector, for example, to contribute into securing natural resources like forests, because forests, water, and wildlife, because that is the only way in which the agricultural sector, for example, can survive, so that we can invest in the medium and small enterprises in the agricultural value chain to be able to still generate our money. So business will exist if only we have a safe environment. Thanks.
Thank you, Jackson, and that opens up to the discussions around, I know in all these subjects we look at risk and also look at opportunities, and I know, Dorothy, you'd started mentioning something about opportunities for bankers in nature positive financing.
Yeah, you know, science speaks and science doesn't lie. And like I said earlier, it's our work as financial services to actually solve the money challenge, because that is the one thing that will support any conservation efforts. I want to mention that, you know, one thing that I recently learned was that the world is running out of sand. For those of you who financed, you know, infrastructure projects and, you know, the built environment, you can imagine what that means for your books. Nuraf is here and she'll tell you the UN even has, I think it's a task force for sand. Obama created a task force for bees. And it's very active because by the bees are an indicator of a very healthy ecosystem. So when you go and smoke your bees out from your, you know, village house, you should be very happy that it means that you're in a very, very healthy ecosystem. Now, what does that mean for us as the banking sector? It essentially means that many of your clients are going to be locked out of international trade. Why? The EU has come up with a number of regulations, the EU deforestation regulations, and they are tightening their regulations in terms of things like disclosure. And they are saying that for us, for you as a farm to get us your French beans to be in, you know, Marks and Spencer or wherever, you need to comply with certain requirements. Many of your clients are not going to be able to meet those requirements. And it's up to you as banks to support your clients and to also understand the risks that lie. I'm going to talk one last thing about the risk, then I go to opportunities. We just completed a central bank stress test for 5 African countries. And your bankers, let me tell you, if you look at the reports, they're online. It's a piece of work we did through McKinsey and Vivid Economics. And it shows you the expected credit losses for these 5 African central banks could rise up to 52% by 2030. And then we've even done country reviews. So the central bank stress testing shows the country reviews and the effects on agriculture, the effects on mining, the effects on, you know, I think we took around 4 sectors. And this stress test was based on science, because we used what, you know, Catherine Halley had mentioned, the global biodiversity framework scenarios. So you're taking science, and then you're taking, you know, central bank's data, and then you're modeling, and you're seeing the effects. That's data and that's science, and it's real and it speaks. Now, let's talk about opportunities. What are we doing and what is possible within the banking sector? I don't know if I'm being recorded, and I hope I won't get into trouble for this, but many of the international banks have set up carbon trading desks. Many of them. Many of these international banks have carbon leads sitting in the UK markets or whichever markets. Yet this carbon is in Africa. This carbon is in Kenya. These projects that Facebook and Google and all these, you know, companies are buying are in your village, right? What does that mean? They're seeing opportunities that ourselves we're not seeing. Carbon credits one, biodiversity credits another. This is essentially where you are paid based on biodiversity impacts. I talked about the Lion Bond. One of our anchor members has actually raised a Lion Bond. And right now we are taking them on a roadshow, speaking about that product, speaking about that potential solution. They're based out of South Africa. It's public. You can go online. You'll find it. And let me tell you, when those guys made a presentation at New York Climate Week, you should have seen the American investors in shock because, one, they did not know that these products exist. And 2, here's an African telling them about opportunities within Africa. This institution is going to go to Geneva, it's going to go to Davos, we are going to take them to any global place where we can show the world that indeed the opportunities are here, and it's African banks who are coming up with these opportunities. We talked about the TNFD, disclosure framework. I don't know, I think many of you could be risk people here. You've seen the International Sustainability Standards Board has just released S1 and S2 recommendations. Essentially, essentially, financial statements going forward will have disclosures on climate. I can tell you within the next 2 years, it's going to be mandatory to have disclosures on nature. And therefore, the financial institutions that have piloted the TNFD, such as Equity Bank, such as KCB, such as Sanlam, such as ICA Lion, these financial institutions are going to be way ahead. Why? Because not only are they getting ready on the disclosure side, which will be very painful, I must say, but they're already looking at opportunities. We are running a TNFD pilot. We have 21 financial institutions across Africa. Out of this, we have 5 early adopters from Kenya, 2 of them being KCB and Equity Bank, and we have Sanlam, ICA Lion, and Brita. And I want to tell you, out of the 21 financial institutions across Africa, 6 of them are at a stage where we say they're commercially ready, meaning they're developing products, they have raised bonds, they're developing solutions, and they're taking to the market, and they're looking for investors, or they're investing. That is what is happening globally. I mean, within Africa, including within Kenya. And so I won't talk much into what the TNFD has done and what, the financial institutions, I think I'll let them speak for themselves. But what we do then within Anchor is that we train, we provide capacity building, we also connect them with investors. And most recently, we've launched 2 flagship aspects. We have launched what we call a Carbon Accelerator Program for the environment, which is a grant facility that we are providing to project developers on carbon, on biodiversity credits. And essentially what we are doing is we are giving them funding for them to get their projects to investable stage, at a stage where if we go to KCB, they will say they are ready to invest because we have de-risked, we have answered all the investors' questions, we have done what you call monitoring and verification, they have complied with all those global standards, they have piloted, and the product is actually now ready or investable. That is part of what we have done. We have raised, it's called an expression of interest, it's open. I want to tell you, if you are a bank seated here, and you have either a project developer or you have a project that you think needs funding to get it to investable stage, please reach out to us. We'd be happy to onboard you. Secondly, we've also launched what we call an Anchor Fellowship Program. We are going to raise 20 nature executive fellows from Africa. Unfortunately, for this cohort, the shortlisting has been done, and we'll be making that announcement soon. And what we are going to do with these 20 fellows, we are going to take them to the University of Oxford, we're going to take them to Mauritius, to African Leadership University in Mauritius. It's modular, so they don't have to leave their jobs, they'll just be going there for 3 weeks, and they come back within a 1-year period. And apart from that, you're also going to support them in projects that they're developing within their entities. And we are going to connect them again with investors. So in a nutshell, there are quite a number of aspects that you're working on to bridge that financing gap. But you're also working with policymakers. I talked about the central bank stress testing work that we have done. We have done, apart from that, we're also working with 10 regulators across the continent, including in Kenya, where we are supporting them in developing what you call nature roadmaps. Why is that important? It's because the policy environment needs to be good enough to enable you guys to actually, look at nature from a very strategic perspective other than just the, the risk side. So the policy work is a key piece that we are working on with regulators. We are working with the central banks. We are working with Securities and Exchange Commissions. We are working with the insurance regulatory authorities. We are working with the SACCO regulatory authorities. And that's a piece of work that essentially should give you that ecosystem that you need. Then finally, at macro, I call it macro loosely. I hope there are no economists in the room. At macro level, we are working with governments to develop what you call national nature strategies. Again, links the very critical aspects of science with the very critical aspect of, economic plans, but then more importantly, how to finance those plans. And so going forward, you should see, and you will see, and on Monday I was in a meeting by the Ministry of, the State Department of Environment, and there's a lot in terms of potential nature funds that are coming out or coming about, including for Kenya, because that was actually one of the concepts they spoke about, the Kenya Nature Fund, that essentially seeks to finance nature conservation and restoration projects. And guess what? The private sector is a key player in this particular aspect. Thank you.
Thank you, Dorothy, for for those very interesting insights on the opportunities. And I think as we get to Samson, who in Kenya we say on the ground, things may be different. Are there any challenges with your nature financing at Equity Bank? I know you mentioned you're an early adopter of TNFD framework, and we pride ourselves in that. And please tell us, are there any challenges that you face?
Thank you, Jackson. I think Dorothy has spoken so well, and like somebody who is on the ground as well, and I think Dorothy have mentioned about some of the things happening in terms of opportunities, where we are seeing whether it's international banks come and, they have set up their own carbon trading desks and all that. Well, us here who are doing a lot of work, we are financing a lot of agriculture, we are doing a lot of work around forestry, restoration and all that. We don't have anything to show for it. One of the key challenges I see it's from a bank perspective is, we tend, in the banking space, we tend to talk about appetite. And I think that's something that you will hear every banker say when you go talk to them about carbon financing. They'll tell you, our appetite for that is still early stage. So it's a challenge I think you have laid out for us, Dorothy, and I think you're doing fantastic work in terms of unlocking those roadblocks we have around that space. We see a lot of these opportunities, and when bankers look at all those opportunities, the numbers, and I've had a few numbers being thrown around what the opportunity looks like. But one thing I know about the value of that opportunity, I heard you talk about, I don't know how many $1 trillion. Dorothy mentioned a different figure. I have mine here, which I'll say it's about $1 trillion globally. 16% of that lies here in Africa, in agriculture. Yeah, so we have the opportunities with us. We need to be more courageous. We need to work more closely together to take advantage of support that is available, some of that has been talked about, to be able to shift our mindset from these solutions not being bankable to taking that first step. So I think that's a key challenge for us, to seeing these opportunities being bankable, starting from those baby steps to be able to get going. And the opportunity is large, and the share of cake is quite large for everyone to take advantage of. I think the other issue that I would say is inherent within the financial sector at the moment is the way the flows of capital are organized. Right now, where the capitals are flowing towards is heavily skewed towards nature negative financing. And I think that's how, and I think Jackson talked about it, that is how we have lived from time immemorial. We have drawn water, cut trees, hunted and fished without thinking. How are we affecting the balances of ecosystems? So the same follows with what we finance. If you were to look at our loan books, we would see, what are we financing that is nature positive? What is nature negative? I think globally we are talking about many trillions of dollars, nature negative, and I think single-digit trillion in terms of nature positive. So there's a very big role, and I think Jackson talked about the financial sector being able to shift these flows to make sure that we are driving this. And I think we can look at that from the sectors where we play, whether you're in building and environment, we are running out of sand. So how will you finance your real estate portfolio? What will you look out for? What do you need your customers to start factoring in when they are designing their construction projects? For agriculture, I think that's one area that has the biggest opportunity in terms of shifting how we shape behavior. And I think somebody has talked about the UDR. I think everybody in export space is in scampering right now to be able to comply. I know for sure coffee sector, everybody is saying, how do we comply? And I think we have gotten grace for the extension of compliance around that. So in a nutshell, we have to be bold. We have to take that risk. We have to start somewhere. We have to work together across different players in the sector to be able to get that going. But looking in general in terms of TNFD and even understanding nature, I think one thing to appreciate is the fact that nature in itself as a topic is fairly new to everyone. And it's not just banks who are struggling to crunch or sort of to understand what we know nature what is. What does it mean for us? Since last year when the early adoption of TNFD was announced, I think globally, not even 1,000 companies have joined or have signed up to start making those steps towards whether it's disclosures, integration, and even looking at opportunities. Out of that, I think below are that are FIs. So it tells you there's a lot of understanding. And if you look at ecosystem of frameworks, or what we call the universe of frameworks for the financial services sector, a lot is happening. And we are not making excuse for being slow on this. A lot is happening. We have S1 and S2 coming. I think compliance coming or requirements coming from next year. So climate, we haven't figured it out. And here we are, nature has been thrown at us. So we are operating in quite an area that is quite uncertain. But also we have to be bold enough to appreciate the opportunity. And it would be interesting to look at those analyses on stress testing, Dorothy has mentioned, just to appreciate the urgency that we need to be looking at this with.
Great. So we are aligned, Dorothy. On the ground, there is consistent sentiment. But you mentioned something, Samson, in terms of there is that feedback of we don't have appetite at the moment. And perhaps let's look at it from, if we don't create the appetite, what happens? Arnold, what risks face us when we don't scale nature positive financing?
Thanks again. I think most of the risks have been very well elaborated. I'm not your typical corporate guy, neither a finance person, just you and speak. So I'm also trying to see how to really break down this risk so that it's not typical UN jargon. But I think in the first panel, most of them had been addressed. There is the whole increasing issues around climate change, the drought, impacts of that, to even, the way we had floods, and also the insurance aspect of it. We're also talking about general trust between the community and the bank. If you're not with them, then who are you bankable for them in this particular project? So I think I wouldn't really mention so much around the risks, but just try to indicate that more partnership and more coordinated approach is required. Listening to Dorothy, Samson, and colleagues here, there's a lot that's going on, but it's within the private sector, banking sector silo. How I wish this conversation then gets to come to the Gigiri side of things and see how we're able to tap into these spaces. So what I see, or how to mitigate those risks, for UNDP, I'll say we have 3 new projects coming up that we've been funded by a number of donors. One of them is on nature disclosure study. So we intend to do a nature readiness disclosure study for Kenya. So we'll be partnering with KBA and majority of partners here to just try to understand what's the landscape. And UNDP is coming in from a point of knowing there's already something that has been done by players like FSD, by WWF, IUCN. But what is the landscape? We want to see what is the policy structure that supports this particular. Very simplistic study, just going to give us more impetus to get into this space more. Then we have a new program that I mentioned, but because of time, I wanted to have a very small clip on biofin, what we call biodiversity finance, which we're also rolling out. Come next year, we are in the process of setting the projects at National Treasury with the Ministry of Environment to just basically help and support Kenya to come up with their biodiversity finance plan. Looking at budget expenditure review, so we're going to get a consultant who's going to come through Kenya's budget for the last 15 years to see how much has been budgeted for nature. We're also going to, again, do a finance needs assessment. How much is going to finance nature in the country? And more importantly, we are going to look at what are the key recommendations. So a number of projects coming up, and I think us being in this space, it's a space that we've never been there that much, so we are appreciating KBA and the team. But we want to see when we do these studies, when we start this consultation, how are you going to inform this so that this is specifically tailored to Kenyan context, and whatever interventions that you're going to scale up together with other UN partners like UNEP and all that, how do you ensure that we are not just using standards that exist in Europe or Latin America with our successful biofin projects, but how do we ensure that whatever that is being done in Kenya, reflected in Kenyan context, is really making sense to the industry? That will be sort of our offer to this particular discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the offer to continue with conversations on this. And finally, to you, Catherine, I know IUCN has been very, very instrumental, particularly developing global standards on nature-based solutions. And how can we tap into your standards more, your role in this space, in creating solutions for nature-based financing?
Okay, thanks a lot for that question. I'll try to keep it short because I know we're winding down. So basically, when we talk about the nature-based solutions, this is a framework that has been designed to help users develop projects that address the societal challenges through sustainable and nature-positive approaches. So it uses a lot of scientific methods. And I think it's important just to briefly, when we say NBS or nature-based solutions, I'll just read out the definition that was agreed upon during the United Nations Environmental Assembly, and this definition is based on the fact that nature-based solutions are also recognized for their role in linking biodiversity and climate change, which is one of the things that we've also been talking about. So when we talk about NBS, in short, we're talking about actions that are there to protect, conserve, restore, sustainably use, and manage natural or modified terrestrial, freshwater, coastal and marine ecosystems, which address social, economic, and environmental challenges effectively and adaptively, while simultaneously providing human well-being, ecosystem services, and resilience and benefits. Biodiversity benefits. So as you can see, this standard was developed to try and bridge the gap between some of the risks that Jackson talked about, the challenges that financial institutions are facing. So it's one of the tools that have been proposed. I'm sure there could be others, and I'm sure Dorothy could tell us there could be others, but I know NBS is one of them that has been proposed. And basically, some of the key highlights of the standard. One is that it provides the criteria, indicators, and metrics that you can use to measure the impact of the projects that you're going to be investing in. So for example, if it's an agricultural project or a restoration project, you can go through the framework to see if you plant just one type of tree, for example, what's going to be the impact on biodiversity. So even as we continue to plant the 15 billion trees in Kenya, we really need to think about the impact on our ecosystems, what type of trees are we planting, where are we planting them, and the impact that is going to have on the environment and also on the communities. So that is just one of the positive aspects of the standard. And then, of course, it's used as a benchmark of quality. So if you use the standard, at least because it's recognized globally, you can ensure that the projects that you're investing have the quality assurance. It can also be used for monitoring and evaluation based on the different matrices that are provided. And finally, we recognize that nature-based solutions provide co-benefits. So in terms of climate change adaptation, mitigation, they enhance community livelihoods, but also protect biodiversity. So when we come to what can KBA, the Kenya banking industry draw, one is that we can use the NBS to assess our risks. So, and I think we have a module on the SFI platform. Perhaps some of you may have undertaken that module. It just gives you an idea of some of the data, the metrics that you can use to assess the different projects that you're going to be investing in. It also unlocks new investment opportunities because when you use the NBS standard, you can be able to identify and finance projects that have significant environmental and social benefits at the same time. It can also be used to catalyze the green bonds that we've been talking about, and also in terms of conservation finance, you can use the NBS standard to be able to assess the projects that you're going to be investing in. I think when we talk about the Lion bond, when we talk about the Rhino bond, quite a number of bonds that are coming up, we really need to see what is going to be the impact of these bonds that we're investing in on the biodiversity. But apart from ecosystem, we talk from IUCN, we talk a lot about the biodiversity ecosystem, but we also try a lot to apply the human rights-based approach to ensure that we're looking at it from a social perspective. And then, of course, we build trust and accountability. When we use one standard that everybody is using across the board, we can be able to enhance this. And then, of course, in terms of capacity building, there's an opportunity to collaborate and work together on this. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Allow us to put a pause on our conversations today. I guess there's just too much more that we could explore in this space, but in the interest of time, allow me to invite any burning questions from... Yes, Juma, there's a hand up.
Thanks a lot to the panel. It's been a great discussion on nature-based solution, what we other times call biodiversity solutions. You've handled the intricate effects of nature in terms of limiting effects of climate, in terms of mitigation adaptation. You've also tackled issues to the opportunities and the risk. Mine would just an insight or further understanding in terms of partnerships. How can banks leverage on partnership? I know Dorothy talked on how you conduct training, capacity building, and of course, connecting with those SMEs who are either investor ready or into the accelerator programs. So my question is, how is the success rate? Because based on that, and what was just handled by my colleague in terms of for banks, we consider the risk appetite. How can banks leverage on the same?
Thank God I've picked the mic because I was thinking you'd close without me saying this. Thanks for that. I want to mention, when you talk of risk appetite, I'm a former risk manager, so I used to cancel and refuse many of these projects that would be brought. But now I'm converted. But I want to say this. At FSD Africa, we have a number of facilities to support transactions. We actually can provide, if a bank, for example, wants to issue or structure a bond, we can actually provide some first loss guarantee, such that in that manner, then the investors to the bond have confidence that they will not lose their funds. And there are many. It's not just FSD Africa. We have DFC. That's a Development Finance Corporation, which is a US, I think it's the US arm, right? They actually offer guarantees. They actually offer first loss support. In fact, for the Lion bond that I'm talking about, DFC is a key partner. And that de-risks quite a lot. We have MIGA, which is the World Bank insurance arm. What does it do? It provides political risk insurance. So if you want to develop a carbon desk, or you want to do a carbon transaction, or you want to support a carbon project or whatever, and the political risks, because they say Africa, they look at a country, they say country risk rating is I don't know what, then Moody's downgrades a country or whatever, MIGA comes in and provides that support. So there are many, many opportunities of partnerships. But the challenge that we have is that many people don't know about this. And that's why at Anchor, We are doing this by connecting you with this. At FSD, we actually also do it ourselves. So we are not just talking, but we are also risking our capital to it. But at the same time, if, for example, you're to join Anchor, right now membership is free. We have 93 members so far, and it's growing. And I would want to ask you to take advantage of the opportunities now and join into the membership. All you need to do is sign what you call the Nature Voices Pledge, which are basic commitments on you doing responsible business on nature. And we will be able to support you, whether it's a TNFD piloting, whether it's taking you to helping you with your roadshows of your products, etc. And then finally, I just want to mention, if you want to learn more, I have to do this speech. We've just launched a podcast. It's called Talks on Nature, a podcast by Anchor. Please check it out on Spotify, YouTube, whatever. You will find it. We demystify this finance, and then we bring scientists to the desk. Scientists to the forgotten what word we use, but to the studio. And we ask them questions. And if you want to learn, for example, about the Lion Bond, there's a 45-minute podcast on it by Martin of First Rand Bank. Just listen to what he says, including you understanding the carbon benefits or carbon sequestration benefits of elephants and all these things that we never knew about. And you'll understand how to bring in finance into nature. Thank you.
Thank you for that window. Any other question? There is a hand up.
Yes, thank you. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
My name is Loom from ABC Bank. I just have a few questions to the panelists. Kennedy, would you tell us what can be done?
If you could keep it maximum 2. I mean,
okay.
Maximum of 2 questions, yes.
It's okay. Maybe could you tell us what could be done or what can be done to enable banks set up carbon trading desks? Then, secondly, what measures have been put in place to ensure that carbon credit rebates reaches the ultimate beneficiaries or other ultimate communities? And kindly allow me, Dr. Chiriongo, finally on this, is there maybe a body that licenses or regulates the organizations that that quantifies carbon trading? So thank you.
Okay. I guess it's free. Who would want to take that? It's open. Dorothy, you've picked the mic. You want to say something?
Yeah, yes, very good questions. Yes, on carbon credit benefits going to the communities, let me tell you, Kenya has done a great job. I applaud the State Department of Environment. It has released carbon credits regulations. And in those regulations, there's a very serious clause on benefits sharing for communities. Not many countries have done that. Kenya is one of those. And so there are now processes that any carbon credit project has to follow to ensure that communities benefit. In terms of your regulation, in terms of the frameworks, yes. I talked about MRV, which is monitoring, reporting, and verification. Any carbon credit has to undergo, any carbon credit project has to be certified. And there are different certification bodies, Plan Vivo, Vera, etc. Now you'll be able to learn all this if you are in a setup, including some of the trainings that we do. But those certifications then allow that carbon credit that you hold to have, you know, the authority or almost value in those international markets. And then the last thing you've asked about how to set up a carbon trading desk. One, it's just the commitment. Two, I want to say many banks, like in South Africa, many banks have heads of biodiversity. Guys who did environmental science, ecology, botany, you know, those things we used to, in campus, they bought zoo people. Those guys, but zoo people are now very, very, you know, in good demand. Why? Because banks are employing them, because they understand the science. And then what they do then is to combine, of course, the financial structuring aspect with the, you know, the scientific aspect. And then you set up your trading desk and you're able to compete with global markets.
And then maybe just to add on to that is that the National Environment Management Authority is actually the regulator that will be registering and also monitoring carbon projects in the country. So the carbon markets regulations have actually outlined the step-by-step process of doing that. So a combination of that and what has been set out in the global agreements then gives you a good idea of what you need to do to be able to, manage a carbon project. Thanks.
Thank you, thank you. Please allow us to close at this point. But I think at closing, I realized something that we need to meet more, converse more, and speak about the solutions and what's happening in which spaces. So thank you very much. Allow me to invite you. We thank the panelists together as we give a round of applause to them for very, 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 very great insights that have come out of this conversation today. So please, you may take your seats, and as I get back to Victoria for a closing.
Thank you so much. A round of applause for Dr. Tiriongo and his moderation as well. I quite enjoy sitting in on these discussions. So as much as I wear a hat of an MC and moderator, my journalist comes out, and I was just texting my producer about some stories. So if you see me in your email inbox or your call logs, just know it's a story that's brewing. But fantastic insights coming out of the panel. I'd like to invite Christine Onyango, KBA Director of Communications and Public Affairs, to officially close us out as we conclude the day.
Thank you, Victoria. Wow, what a day. So I have to throw Dr. Tiriongo under the bus. Let me just start there. Let me take out my glasses so I can see him. So when we set out this year, we were just going to do the Catalyst Awards. He comes to us a month before that and he says, no. We have to do this differently. And together with Rosalind, who unfortunately cannot be here today because she has a broken leg, they made us work hard. I lost a few pounds. So I have actually gotten such good feedback today. So, protocol dictates that I start from the top, but I want to start by thanking Dr. Tiriongo. Please stand up. And Rosalind in her absence. Yeah, so let's start there. I think this was a very good session, and the afternoon session was fantastic too. So it's a pity we didn't have the full house. Maybe next time we do it all before lunch so that nobody goes to sleep after the sumptuous meal. So good afternoon, distinguished guests. As we conclude the summit, I would like to express our heartfelt gratitude to all our guests that have attended today on behalf of Kenya Bankers Association. We'd like to thank, in absentia of course, our chief guest, Mr. Ronald Omari, who gave us some good education on Nairobi River and what the Ministry of Environment is doing about it. We also would like to thank our Kenya Bankers Association Vice Chair, Ms. Betty Korir, for her comments and ongoing leadership in promoting sustainable finance practices throughout the industry. To our partners, IFC, WWF Kenya, UNEP FI, GIZ, and all the others. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you for your steadfast commitment and collaboration. Thank you for your support, which is crucial in making today a success. And we hope that we can continue in this progress towards making the sustainability agenda in Kenya and worldwide a priority. Thank you to our panelists. We had 2 fantastic sessions. I learned a lot. I've always wondered what happened to the hyenas, why they became extinct, and what that means for us. So thank you, Jackson, for that. We just want to acknowledge you and thank you. Catalyst winners, thank you very much. This year we had a 60% increase in entries. And for that, we are grateful. We ask that you continue to participate. I'd like to mention that in Q1 of 2025, we will have a session with the judges, so you can go over the entries for those of you that want to improve, for those of you that wonder why you didn't win a category that you probably spent a lot of time in, and for those, just for those of you who now are interested in participating, we will be in touch. So in closing, I first want to thank the team that put this together, and that's the KBA Secretariat team. It appears there's only myself and Dr. Tirionga in the room, but yeah, thank you very much for your hard work. I would also like to thank StagePass. They're the people that are responsible for this beautiful, beautiful artwork, yeah, and for helping us really, really tell you how much we've done in terms of sustainability. And KBA reaffirms its commitment to collaborating closely with the private and public sector and maintaining a responsive and inclusive banking industry. So we will continue to cultivate partnerships that emphasize innovation, resilience, and sustainability in the face of the evolving challenges and opportunities. So thank you all for your time today, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much, Christine. I believe there is some tea and coffee outside. Oh, okay, so we have some tea and coffee outside as we network and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you so much.
I don't wanna be your bestie. Baby, gotta look at you, Granny said you bendy. You're the part of the cable. We're connecting. Love the way we talk, love the way we walk, we be vibing. Look at you when you